smile. Hi, all. Please, Vincent.
Okay, thank you, Moya. Hello, everyone. So good to see you all again. So welcome to this new session from came in the new era from strategy to impact. So we are still in the module of change management that we believe is one of the key module into this set of sessions. And today we are delighted and also very honored to have with us Shawn Callahan. So just to give a bit of background, I got chance to meet Shawn, I will say at least 10 years ago, in an event organized by Arthur Shelley. I think a lot of you know Arthur. It was a Creative Melbourne event, and he had invited Shawn to give a keynote talk on, of course, on one of his key topics on storytelling. And so I got chance at the time to get a signed copy of his book. So very lucky to have one of these. And Shawn is a KMer, so I'm sure he will share a bit his background on the time he was working at IBM. But yeah, I was reading, going back to the book today, and I completely forgot this story you had in the introduction meeting with Dave Snowden and so on. So it was lovely to go back to this book. Great. So, I mean, we could not get a best speaker on this topic than Shawn Callahan. I mean, he will tell you again, but he has been working with all these big companies all over the world, and I'm also a strong believer that storytelling is a very, very powerful way. To get people, to inspire people, to get people to engage into a change. And we all know the story of the World Bank, and I think Rodolphe mentioned it in one of his past talk on how the World Bank started to engage into its knowledge management initiative more than 20, almost 30 years ago, using
Mm.
also this approach. So, Shawn, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are all looking forward to learn from you, and there is so much we can learn from you and your stories. So please, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Vincent. That was a very lovely introduction, and I'm very pleased to be here. As Vincent said, I started off in the field of knowledge management. I've got a photo actually. I'm going to show you my slides, but I've got a photo to show you, um, just to really give away my age, I think, more than anything else. Um, Now, hopefully, you can see that slide. I see
Yes,
some
yes,
thumbs up
yes.
there.
Yeah, yes, we
Yeah,
can see
yeah,
it full
good, good,
screen.
good,
Yes.
good. Um, so um, back in the late 90s, there I am. Back in the late 90s, I uh, decided it would be a good idea to start a community of practice around this topic of knowledge management for the Australian government. And it was Kate Muir, actually, who was the title of knowledge manager for essentially the Department of Social Security. So I went and visited her. I said, look, you want to create this thing called a community of practice. And we ended up calling it ACT KM. ACT was the state in which this group got together. And it was fabulous. We built it up, and I think it might be one of the longest running KM communities of practice. I mean, it's turned into other things now, as you would well know. Um, but it was a great start, and I was always very interested in the role of tacit knowledge and how do you share that? How do you engage in it? Help people immerse in it, if you like, more than anything else. And that led me, as Vincent said, to Dave Snowden. I was working at IBM at the time. Of course, as soon as you start working for a large organization, you sort of put the feelers out to see who's doing what. And I found that Dave Snowden was doing this work in knowledge management. And I ended up joining the Kinevin Centre and working with him over a period of 4 or 5 years. It was a great learning experience because we were throwing ourselves into these large organizations, collecting hundreds, if not thousands, of stories. And the big lesson I learned out of that experience was that the stories that people tell in organizations are not beautifully crafted heroes' journeys or, sort of three-part, sort of structures per se. They were just these little anecdotes. And so in 2004, I decided to start my own business and I called it Anecdote because of this observation, I guess, about the types of stories people tell in organizations. Um, but today I thought I would sort of zoom into just one application of story work. And I say story work because I think it's a bit more than storytelling, and we'll touch on that in a moment. And I want to take you through some foundations, and then just some major elements around, how do you craft a change story? What story skills do people need in organizations to do this? And then the last one is almost like the bottom up element of story work. How do you get people at the front line sharing stories in a systematic and purposeful way so that you change a culture, right? And I always had this feeling that if you want to change a culture, you've got to change the stories that are told, right? So part of it was finding out what stories are told, but also having some mechanisms to change that. Um, so one of the things that came on my radar, and I was just watching some television, I think, or maybe I was listening to a podcast, um, and these two magicians, people might have come across Penn and Teller. They have, a show in Las Vegas. It's been going for many, many years. Penn is the tall, stocky fellow. Teller in the show doesn't speak, but in this case, Teller was telling a story. He was sort of saying that when you do a magic trick, like make a coin disappear in your hand, if you just sort of show people the coin, close your hand, and then open it, and it's not there, people are less impressed with that trick, right? Um, they just sort of, there's no sort of cause and effect that's happening. And what he found was that if you do the smallest of stories, like you put the coin in your hand, you close it, and then you maybe take a match and drop it near your hand and go, oh, that hurts. And then open your hand and it's gone. People are far more interested in that little trick than if you had no story at all. And I thought it's just so interesting, just that human feeling that you need to know why something happens. And I think this is the basis of change. People are always wanting to know, why is this happening? Why are we going through this process? And I think this is something we can really help people with stories. I'm actually just about to start probably one of my biggest um, change story. I call it a change story. It's really a strategy story, but for an organization, got 400,000 employees all across the world, and each region is going to go through this process that we're going to learn about. And it's going to go through this process so that they can create their own story to explain the
Humans
strategy.
make um humans
Oh, by the
Sorry.
way,
Yeah.
that's okay. By the way, if anyone has any questions as we go along, you can either pop them in the chat window or just come off mute and ask the question, right? I always like going down little side alleys and sidebars. Um, so this is just the very simple idea here of for to drive and help change happen in an organization, you need some sort of change story. You need people who have some story skills, and then finally you need some way to systematically and purposely embed stories through your organization, and that has to be an ongoing and continuous process. But before we get to this element, I just want to give a bit of a feeling for everyone around what does it feel like when you're sharing a story, right? So, like this is a little exercise I've got for you. So these are our foundations. By the way, I've in the chat window I put a copy of the workbook that goes with this. This is actually part of a bigger program that we run for organisations. But I popped the workbook in the chat window, and you can download that PDF. And these numbers in the bottom left-hand corner actually refer to the page numbers in the workbook, just in case you're wondering. But I thought I'd do this exercise. It's sort of in two parts. The first part, I'm going to pair everyone up, right? And I'm just going to ask you to more or less answer two questions. The first question, I'll get you to share with your colleague for a minute. You got to go for a whole minute, right? And then when that minute is up, then the other person will answer that question. And then we'll come back and then we'll go back out into the same groups and we'll ask you the second question. Okay. Um, so here's the question. It's a pretty simple one. All I want you to do is for a minute, I know this sounds a bit hokey, but it's got a purpose. I just want you to describe to the other person what you do for a living, right? And you've got to keep going for a minute, right? That's the key thing. So put your timers on when you do this, and and then when you've finished your minute, let the other person do their minute.
Shall
Any
I open
questions?
Shall I open breakout rooms for
Yeah,
four?
I was going to do it, but you can do it. That'd be cool.
I'm not sure
Just
that you can
just
do
in
it.
pairs. Pairs is good.
I'll put 15
For
of
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, 2 minutes, and then we'll come back and I'll tell you the next question.
If anyone is alone, just tell me and I'll move you because we have here. I hope that will be okay now. I see, Alison, that you have returned already.
We cannot hear you well, Alison, yes. Moya, I pushed the wrong button. In my case, I left the meeting, so you may have to reassign me as a co-host. Sorry.
No problem.
You guys got back
I'm here
early.
too.
No. We are not back. we just Alison, you just joined? We cannot hear you, Alison, yes.
Alison was in some room.
Yeah, I was in another room, but we were three of us, so that's why I decided to. Oh, everyone is back.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. It took me time where there was 1 or 2 rooms with 3, no computers. Okay, here we are. Everyone is back. 2
That's
minutes.
okay. We'll just adapt. Whatever happens, happens. That's good. So you've done the first part of this exercise. Hopefully you both had a chance to share, a little bit about what you do for a living. It doesn't matter if you didn't, as long as you get to hear a little bit of that language, if you like. But the second question I've got for you, now I might have to share my slides again, I think. Let me just have a look. Yes, I do. Hang on. Yeah, so the second phase is I want you to go back into the same group, and this time you've got a minute to share a moment where you felt, made a little bit of a difference at work. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I'm thinking, you might have pointed someone in the right direction. You might have listened to, um, someone helped them out in some way. So that's all we have to do. Just one small moment where you felt like you've made a difference for someone at work. Okay, jump out into your rooms, stay with it until you've done a minute each, and then we'll get back here. Now, did you guys just come back from your breakout rooms or did you just hang around in the plenary?
If you speak to, I don't know to who you are speaking, but if you speak to me, I just arrived 15 seconds ago because I had a problem
That's
to
okay.
arrive on time. So,
That's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to double check, see
you know,
if anyone had any problems
no,
doing
no,
the
no, no, no.
exercise. But
Just, and
that's
we're in a
fine.
breakout room.
Yeah, they're just coming back. They've got about 45 seconds before everyone
Okay,
comes back.
no problem.
Um, I was just doing a little exercise with people. But we're gonna have a conversation about that exercise when they get back.
Okay, with pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. Do, 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 do. I was actually talking with Gunnar, so he's traveling at the moment. A few people coming back. There he is.
See that we are not yet connected.
Is that on LinkedIn?
Yes,
Ah, please do that.
just sent you the invitation.
Okay, beautiful. Yes, please feel free to connect if anyone wants to do that. That'd be great. Okay, welcome back. I think we've got everyone now. So, what you might have noticed in just that little exercise is that I sort of got you to speak in two different ways, right? In the first way, describing what you do for a living, you tend to just list things out. It's kind of a dot pointy way of speaking. And then the second way is definitely more of a way in which you would share a real life experience, a story of some sort. But I guess what I really want to know from you guys is what did you notice? How did you feel? What was the difference between the two ways of communicating? What other things stood out for you?
I don't know if there are people in this breakout room. I just saw the
Oh yeah,
post.
we're all here, Alexander. You didn't do the exercise, so
No, no.
I'll have to get someone else to jump in here for a moment.
Okay.
Okay. Who would like to give us a little bit of an insight into what you experienced?
I'll go.
Gosh,
Ah,
sorry.
okay.
Then
Rudolph,
you
go
go.
for it.
Okay, I think the second time we spoke with a lot of emotion and feeling and tried to convey the emotion to the other person of what we're doing. So,
Yep, definitely. So emotion comes out. Is one of the key things that you noticed in stories. What else did we notice? Lynn, did you want to?
Yeah. Hi, Shawn. How you going?
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too. There was, even though very, very globally dispersed people, I was discussing with Rowan, we had very similar sort of stories as well. So,
Interesting.
yeah. Given that it was, around knowledge management and sharing
Mhm.
some of our successes, so
Yeah,
and some of our
yeah.
challenges with the tools that we use, it was interesting that they were very similar. So that was interesting as well. So
Now you've touched on one of the really key factors or dynamics in storytelling, and that is when you share stories and you end up with similar stories, you have this feeling that, oh, I'm a little bit like that person. And someone once told me that the shortest distance between two people is a story. But I've got a feeling that the shortest distance between two people is two stories. Like the story you tell about your experience and then the story they tell. And because they're similar, you go, hey, we're pretty close. We have similar backgrounds, similar interests, or similar experiences. Yeah. So thanks, Lynn. That's a great one. Any other things people noticed in those two different ways of communicating? Did anyone? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, hi, Shawn. Yeah, if I may, I was just wondering also, just to play sort of not devil's advocate, but if we had switched the sequence around, because the first conversation, don't forget, was a bit of an icebreaker. Yes, a bit more rigid, a bit more like, okay, this is what I do, type of thing. Basically introducing yourself, and which allowed the second one to then make sense contextually because you already understood what the person does. If we had switched the sequence around, I'm wondering if it had the same effect.
Yeah, it might. I
Also,
don't know.
don't forget, you also build
I've never
trust.
tried that. But I tell you what I find interesting is that even though, the session's about storytelling, just how few people actually tell a story in the first description, right? Like there's nothing stopping anyone to sort of say, let me tell you what I do for a living. Actually, an example just from yesterday is a great illustration of it, and tell that story and sort of say, hey, and I do that 1,000 times. We don't do that. We tend to just list out these things, which is kind of interesting that we don't do it. So it's not a habit for everyone. And really, I guess that's one of the points that I really want people to realize is for this, you want to develop it as a bit of a habit of sharing experiences. Now, the last question I want to ask the group was, did anyone have the experience as they were listening to the second way of communicating, the story approach, that they could see it happening, right? There was some visual elements. Yeah, Patrick's nodding. Because it turns out that if you can make your story visual, your visual memory is just so great. Like it makes things stick like nothing else. And there's lots of good experiments of it. But just from your own experience, if you go to, let's say you go and have a look at a house for sale, right? And you walk through that house, you go into the kitchen, you go into the bedroom, down the hall, upstairs, other two bedrooms, and then someone asks you 6 months later to sketch out the floor plan of that house, you'll be able to do that. Because we have this phenomenal memory of visual and geographic location, right? And that's what stories are, visions and geographies, times and places. That's what stories are. That's why they're so sticky, right, in terms of remembering something. Anyway, that's all I wanted to do for some little foundation, a little bit of thinking about storytelling. But I want to get into the, I guess, the first thing you really want to be able to do in storytelling, and that is to build your repertoire of stories, right? And I'm just going to show you just one sort of framework that I use all the time. It just helps you spot stories. And I'm going to leave you with one important tip around storytelling as well. So let me just hit my share button again. Here we go. Yeah, so spotting stories is it's kind of like the prerequisite for all this. If you can't tell if something's a story or not, you know, your work that you're doing is just not going to get the impact, because you only get the benefits of storytelling if you're actually telling a story. And you might think, God, that's such an obvious thing, Shawn, but you'll be surprised at the number of times, like this happened to me just 3 weeks ago. I was doing some work in London, and just before my session, the head of HR, big oil company, came up to me and said, "Oh, Shawn, we're doing this big change. Here's our story." And it was actually a series of 6 paragraphs. And I looked down them, and none of them were a story, right? They were just people saying stuff. People saying stuff is not a story. To be a story, you have to have certain characteristics, and these are the characteristics, right? The first thing is stories nearly always start with a time marker, right? As soon as you hear someone say, "Oh yeah, a couple of weeks ago in London," right? That's a time marker and a place marker. Or, "Oh, back in 2014," or "a while back," vague time marker. So, you know, that's the beginning of a story, you know, and you know, we all know the very favorite beginnings of our fairy tale stories is once upon a time. But as I say to my colleagues, it doesn't work that well in business. But it's the same idea. Stories start with a time marker. The next thing stories have is stories have events. This happened, then that happened, then this happened. They're not opinions, they're not perspectives, they're not points of view, they're just events, right? That's all they are. And they have to be events. And it's better if the events are visual events, right? As we've just learned. Thirdly, stories have characters. In business stories, we have people, and you know, people have names. People have dialogue. And interestingly, you know, when you do dialogue, by the way, dialogue is really important in stories. Not screenwriters, but songwriters use dialogue all the time. And it brings, what it does is it brings the listener in to feel like they're right there. Like you'll say something in a story which is along the lines of, "Oh yeah, then I bumped into Peter, and you know what Peter said?" And then you do the Peter dialogue, right? And it just creates intimacy by sharing dialogue. The interesting fact about dialogue is you can't deliver dialogue unless it's inside a story. It's the only time you can deliver dialogue is inside a story. So when you hear dialogue, you should be going, "Ah, yeah, that's a story," right? And finally, for it be an actual story, you can say all these things, but unless you do this last bit, which is you got to say something that's unanticipated. And I use that word very advisedly, unanticipated. You don't have to be, your socks are not having to be blown off. You don't have to wow people. It just has to be enough for people to hear and they go, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that." Right? That's the minimum required for a story. This doesn't say what's a good story. It just tells you what a story is. Now, with that information, it's a curse as well as a blessing, because from here on in, you'll start to see stories everywhere, right? But you need this so you can build your repertoire of stories, right? And by the way, it's not a business story until you have a business point. And the simplest way to deal with the business point is to preface your story with the business point, right? So, for example, if I told you, I'll just tell you a little story about some work I did with Mars. So The chairperson of Mars is a lady, was a lady called Victoria Mars. She was part of the family. It's a family business. And she was visiting a Tesco to see her products being displayed. And of course, when she arrives, everyone rolls out the red carpet. And they were taking her down this aisle of Tesco. And just as she turned into the aisle, she could see one of her, they call them associates, her colleague, still putting together the pile of sort of dog food, cans of dog food, sort of piling up. She was on her hands and knees, furiously trying to get this done. And the person who was with Victoria Mars, the head of sales, was very unhappy about this. And he starts to speed up. She starts to speed up. And eventually they both get there at the same time. And Victoria Mars gets down on her hands and knees and just sort of says, how can I help? Right. And when I heard that story, I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing bit of leadership. And if I was to retell that story with the business point, I would just start with the business point, right? I would say, you know what? Leadership by example is one of the most powerful things you can do in an organization. Just a few months ago, I heard this example from Mars tell the story, right? Now, the reason why it's a powerful way of doing it is that the listener now knows why you're telling this story. Because sometimes people, when they jump into a story, the listener's going, why am I being told a story? Like they're freaking out a little bit. They feel like they get stuck in this story. But if they know they're going to learn something, they'll relax a little bit. They'll sort of go, oh, okay, this is about leadership. This is about, modeling behavior. And then when they see that, Victoria Mars get down on her knees, this multi-billionaire doing this, they go, it's like the penny drop moment for them. And a little dopamine hits and they go, I get what you're saying there, right? That makes sense. And in fact, they'll probably remember examples of those little leadership behaviors that they've seen, right? So all these things come flooding back. So this is a simple way to sort of add your business point to your stories. You should do it for every business story. It's the difference between a business story and just chatting down at the cafe with your friends, right? Now, I said I was going to mention a little tip. My tip is simply this. When you are sharing stories, whatever you do, don't say, I'm going to tell you a story, right? Because guess what? If I imagine the scenario, I'm standing in front of my people, I'm giving some sort of talk presentation to them, and I start off by saying, look, I just want to start by telling a bit of a story. Now, for some cultures and some organizations, that's okay. But I find the majority of business cultures, people just roll their eyes. They go, okay, rightio, let's get this over with. It's a real attitude of, why am I listening to this? However, if you were to rewind the tape and say, guys, something really important happened last week I need to share with you. Everyone's sitting there going, well, what happened? They want to know what happened. They still hear a story, but you don't use the S word, right? So just get that out of your vocabulary. Try to keep it right away from it. Now, I wanted to jump really to this idea of change stories. They're sort of deceptively simple in some ways. And probably the question will be is how do you implement it in some? That's probably the bigger question. But I'll start with what it is, and then we can talk about implementation. I guess the first thing, it just starts with a very basic story structure, right? And in my book, I called it a clarity story. And I called it that because I thought it was good at answering the why question, right? And the 4 parts to this story is simply, so imagine you're in the so now section, you're trying to explain the change. The so now is the change. And let's just say the change is you're going to implement some new technology that's going to improve your knowledge management. Okay. So you can sort of say, look, in the past, the way we dealt with this was like this, and we did some pretty good work. Actually, by the way, in the past, it's always good to honor the past a little bit. You don't want to dump on the past. Because if you're working with an organization people have been working there for many years, they don't want to hear a story where you just dump it on the past because they were there. So you sort of say, yeah, we did it pretty well and we got a lot done, but it didn't quite do everything for us because a couple of things happened. Maybe a new competitor came in, maybe technology change, AI just appears from nowhere. Something has to happen that causes you to need and implement this KM system, right? It's not just coming out of the blue. And in the then something happened, you really need just 2 or 3 things. You don't want to pad it out with just every possibility. You're not giving a history. You're trying to craft a story that's compelling. Okay. And then you say, so now we're implementing this knowledge management system, and it's going to have these elements to it. And then you want to finish by describing just a couple of vignettes of the future, right? And my 2 favorite ways of doing the future, one is using the magical starting phrase, which is simply, so imagine this. Because as soon as you say, so imagine this, you can make up anything after that, because it's clear that you're creating something out of nothing, right? So you might sort of say, so imagine this. A field worker pulls out their smartphone and in 3 clicks, they get the answer and they can actually shift the way in which they work, blah, blah, blah. You want to make it as visual and compelling as you can, these future statements, right? I call them little scenes, future scenes. And you might do 3 of them. You might sort of say, and imagine this and imagine that. I can tell you what your intuition will make you do. Your intuition, and maybe all the years of work in organizations, is you'll get to the end and your habit will be to list out the characteristics of the future, right? Oh, in the future, we'll be more transparent. In the future, everyone will have access to the system. In the future, these are story killers, right? Because what you're doing is you're falling out of story mode back into dot point mode. Okay, so you want to keep it, and because we remember endings, the end of the story is the most important part of the story, right? So you need a little springboard for people to imagine it and go, yeah, I want this future. Now, of course, in 3 imagine if type statements, you can't get the full picture of what the future's like, but it gets people to ask questions and, you start to get people into a conversation. So imagine this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, and I call this the William Gibson approach. You might have come across his quote, which he said, he's a sci-fi writer, and he said, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I kind of like this idea, especially in big organizations. So this company I'm working with 400,000 people, their future is already happening. There's some little corner of this organization where someone is doing something which is defining their future. Imagine if you could find that little group and tell their story, right? So you can sort of say, and our future is already happening. We have a team in Hyderabad, India, who just 3 weeks ago, ... start telling their story. And then you finish that story by saying, and imagine if we could do that everywhere. Just imagine the impact that would have. Like, again, you're trying to get them to fill in the dots in terms of what the possibilities are. Now, with this story, if you tell it at the high level, like in the past we were like this, and then it happened, and so now we're putting this system in the future. If you tell it at that level, it's still a little bit of a boring story, I have to say. It's a bit high level. And the reason why I've got this idea of moments in here, this is what makes the story interesting and different for every person who tells it, right? So, for example, one of the moments might be, and then AI comes along. And so you sort of say, in the past it was like that. And actually then something happened. I mean, AI hit, look, it was only 3 years ago. And then you drop into a moment where you're sharing one of your own personal experiences, where you sort of say, I remember the first time I actually booted up ChatGPT. And I was just sitting there mucking around, creating poems in all sorts of different styles. But then I got it to do this one simple activity, which in the past, creating proposals was something that took me ages. I knocked that proposal out, I reckon, in 15 minutes. That's when I knew this was going to change the world. It's sort of, you want to bring in one little personal moment. And, and you can put, it usually happens in the then something happens section. But it can happen anywhere, really. Um, the moments is the things that bring it to life. It's the thing that makes it visual. It's the thing that connects with other people, and it makes it sound like you, right? And it's not just a script that you're telling; it's something that happened to you. So the clarity story I guess, pattern is the foundation for this. By the way, you see this clarity story pattern everywhere. I was in here we are, Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And this is the Gettysburg Address. And of course, I'm always on the lookout for time markers. 7 years ago. Sounds like a time marker. In the past, it was like this. Now this is happening. We're engaged in this civil war. We're now dedicating this battlefield as a war grave, so that in the future we can have a country that looks like this. So once you see the pattern, you see it all over the place. Now, I mentioned that, if you like, the clarity story is the top-down element of this. And the way by the way, the way you build this, so for this company, what I'm going to do, starts next week. I'm going to go, I've got their first leadership group, the top leaders in this company coming together, and I'm actually going to take them through. I've got this big, got one here. I've got this big, clarity story on a big piece of paper, and I just break them up into groups. I've got 20 people, so I'll probably break them up into 4 groups of 5. And each group will have a go at telling that story or creating that story. And then I get each group to stand up and tell it. And the others have to sort of say, yeah, I like that bit. That's a really good bit. Oh, I'm not too sure about that bit. And we then create a version on the wall as they're each telling it. It's sort of like story versus story. They all have slightly different versions of it. But what they're doing is that they're engaging the story to a point where they own the story, right? And this is the key thing. You don't want to be just the clever person who writes the story for them. You want them to create it. And then we repeat that at all sorts of different levels in different places around the organization. Now, it's probably a good point for me to just briefly pause and see if there's any questions. I've been keeping an eye on the chat window. I'll just see if there's anything there.
No question yet in the chat window.
Questions.
I mean, we are all passionate and listening carefully to your stories. Right. We are absorbing at this stage. So
absorbing is good, but feel free to ask any questions as we go along. I was going to tell you then, the last sort of part of this puzzle is the embedding, right? You want to embed stories, and how do you go about doing that in an organization? And I guess it goes back to this idea that you want to change culture by changing the stories that people tell. And there's lots of different organizations that do it. I mean, if you get up early and you peer through the window of an Apple store, which I did in Perth, I think this is in Perth, you'll see them huddled together. And what they're doing is that they're sharing stories of customer impact, right? So this is at the front line of, their sales organization, essentially. And the manager just sort of says, so, over the last week, or even for the last day, has anyone got an example of, where we felt like we've made a difference for a customer? And someone will share an example. and everyone will clap, and then he'll ask a couple of questions. And it's the questions that are really important, right? Because it's not just the telling of the story, it is the making sense of the story. And so one of my favorite questions is simply, oh, okay, so that's a great story. Tell me, and aiming at everyone in the group, what's significant about this story? Now, anyone who's familiar with most significant change as a technique will recognize this. But just by asking what's significant, and you'll be amazed what people will say. They'll say things like, oh, you know what's significant is Janet would never have done that unless she'd done the XYZ training. No, there's no way she could do it without the XYZ training. And then someone else will jump in and go, yeah, but did you see how Brad, our manager actually backed her up, because you can't do this on your own. You've got to be backed up by one of the leaders in the group. And then someone else, anyway, what they're doing in this understanding and pulling apart the story and trying to work out what's significant is they're working out for themselves how to have impact on their customers, without any, posters with inspirational comments or any of that sort of stuff. It's just grassroots experience and pulling that apart. And then after you ask the question, okay, so what's significant about this? You might ask a question is so have we ever seen something like that happen before? And someone will go, oh, yeah, 2 weeks ago. And then they'll tell a story. And what that does is sort of says, oh, look, we do this. This is something we can do. This is not out of the ordinary. And then finally, you might finish up by saying, so tell me, does this inspire us to try something new, right? Is this giving us some ideas, a new way of doing something? And so I go, yeah, what we should do is X, right? And this is the beginning of a new story, right? So it becomes this cycle of stories. This is my little sort of flow chart, if you like. You want to find a bunch of stories. And by the way, we use a technique called anecdote circles to collect stories. Again, I'll throw that up in the, I'll put the PDF of our booklet on anecdote circles. I think it's one of the most popular things off our website. Anyway, you get these stories together as your funnel to start with. You might select a compelling story. Then you push that out to all your different teams. You get them to talk about it. They get inspired to try something similar or different. And then that's a story that you submit back up into the funnel. So you get this continuous sort of sharing of stories through an organization. So lots of different ways of doing that. So I know I've zipped through this pretty quickly. Give you an idea of what a change story might look like and how you go about crafting a change story. Few small story skills, like putting the point before your story and helping you spot stories. Okay, that's kind of like the foundation that you need. And then finally, and by the way, this embedding stories is often overlooked. Everyone gets very excited by the top-down, town hall, let's get the CEO out to do the big rah-rah session. It doesn't have long-term impact, right? You've got to do the embedding stories part of it for it to really stick. And, the best companies and organizations who put it into practice, get lots of advantage out of it. I'll give you one little example. I did a project for Commonwealth Bank in Australia. It was the time in which, I don't even remember where they had the Royal Commission and they realized that they shouldn't probably incentivize the front line with money to sell you things like insurance and things like that. There was all this crazy behavior that was going on. So they took away all these incentives from the front line, monetary incentives, and they were really worried that their revenues would just plunge. Now, we happened to be working in the Commonwealth Bank at the time, and we got into a conversation where they were telling us about their concern. And we sort of said, well, why don't you replace explicit rewards with implicit rewards, right? And they were interested in this idea and they wanted to know how to do it. And I said, well, sharing stories of customer impact makes people feel good. It makes people feel that they're making a difference to people's lives. It's implicit reward. So they put in a process, a bit like I've just described, run by the branch managers. So I think there's like 50,000 people involved in this. And they do this 2-3 times a week, just like the Apple Store. But they have branch managers who do it, and they tell stories of their customers. And their engagement scores went up, their revenues went up. And to this day, and we did this probably 5 years ago, to this day, it's something that they do every week. And it's what they do is they actually tell these stories. And if they think they've got a really good one, they put it on their Yammer network and hashtag it customer impact story. So that's how they share broadly across the bank. Now, I thought I'd finish there, give us a few minutes to ask any questions.
Yes, we have questions now for
We have
the
questions.
chat. Yes. So Kim, do you want to first share your experience?
Sure, thanks, Shawn. I was just saying in the chat how brilliant this session was and how it's something I'm really passionate about myself. And so just getting to understand the mechanics of storytelling and how it works is brilliant, because I actually read a chapter recently in a book called Owning Up to Mistakes, which just come out, and it's for the legal sector. But I wrote one, and I think my original title, it got slightly mushed down, was Mistakes Make Stories That Stick. And it was all about how mistakes are so important, and referencing Dave Snowden's ideas and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wish I'd been to this session beforehand, because it would have helped me so much.
Well, mistakes, we do love mistakes, right? But here's one thing I've learned out of mistakes is that you can tell a really strong mistake story and people will go, ooh, better avoid that. That was bad, like let's never do that, right? But they don't know what to do, right? So it's good to follow your mistake story with a success story, right? So that they go, oh, you do that instead. Oh, I see. It takes the mistakes or it grabs people's attention, no doubt. But you got to follow with a success story. Yeah. Oh, well, good luck. I look forward to hearing how you go on that.
Thank you.
And we have a follow-up question from Josephine. I think that directly linked to what you just described. Josephine?
Question, because I think we now reflected predominantly on like success stories and customer impact, but what about the stories of really tough lessons, failures, where there's not necessarily like a positive spin at the end, but where you still want to make sure the audience really understands the gravity and kind of comes up with some recommendations and like indeed the turnaround, that the spin that the story needs, but that might not be there yet. So I was wondering whether you had any tips on that.
Yeah. Well, one thing, a friend of mine, she still works for the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, but she told me this probably about 10 years ago. She said they were doing some mission where the capsule, this is very apropos of really what's going on now with the moon mission, because they'll also land in the water through a capsule, I think. Well, they had this idea. It was a capsule that had a really important payload. And it was going to land over sort of ground. And so they came up with this approach where they were going to capture the capsule with helicopters with hooks on it, right? And so this is a big deal. Project managers working on this for years and years and years. On the day, they're all videoing this thing, and this capsule comes flying through the atmosphere. The helicopters are there with their big hooks, and the capsule just goes flying right through. They don't capture it at all with the hooks, and it just smashes into the ground to smithereens, right? Now, she runs a session which is, lessons learned from project managers. So she went straight to this project manager. She said, this is great. He says, there's no way I'm talking about this, right? She said it took her 2 years before he had the ability to even talk about that particular failure. Right. So I guess one of the lessons is sometimes you can't get the story straight away because it hurts too much for some people. The stakes are so high in that case. So that would be one lesson from it. But the other thing is it's so interesting how people don't even know what lessons there are to be learned. I remember running a lessons learned exercise. It was the simplest exercise you can imagine it was an IT group, been working together for a number of years. And I sort of said, we'll get together for to see what lessons we learned at the end of the project. And one of the project members sort of said, Shawn, quite frankly, it's a pretty standard, project. We didn't learn any lessons. And I went, oh, okay. So I just drew a little timeline and along this wall, and I said, okay, tell me the big events, and people start putting the events on it, and then and I got them to do what their mood was through the project, right? So, and everyone sort of put their mood, and sometimes the mood was low. And I said, oh, this mood was really low here at the beginning. What was going on there? And this guy who said there was no lessons, he said, oh my God, getting our funding was the biggest pain in the ass. It was terrible. And anyway, they all talked about that. And at the end, he goes, uh, tell me, if we ever have a problem getting a sponsor, can you remind me never to do this project? And I had to say to him, that sounds a lot like a lesson. I think that might have been a lesson. Anyway, we found lesson after lesson after lesson out of that, right? And the easiest thing, draw a timeline, get people to remember events, get them to relive those events. All these things come out of that. So, and good and bad, by the way. And you want to balance it too. Yeah, great questions.
Thank you, Shawn. Patrick,
Thanks,
you want to
guys.
go ahead?
Yeah. I guess mine is more around corporate communication, where storytelling can be used or is often used for motivational purposes, but there's a fine line where it can actually become seen cynically as a spin. So I don't know. So my question was really around what kind of advice do you give to senior management to avoid, to make it to ensure that it's motivational, it doesn't have the counter effect.
Well, I tell you what, the worst offenders in organizations are the sales teams, right? I have to, really make it clear to them. I don't want you to make up these stories, right? These have to be things that actually happened. So that's the first thing. That's the authenticity element, right? But the other thing that can happen is a leader gets stuck on a story, right? He thinks he or she thinks they've got this great story, and they just keep telling it over and over and over again. And people realize, oh, he's just saying it for effect, right? He's just saying it to try us to believe X. Whereas if you're really, one of the best leaders in this, like I remember working with the CEO of an insurance company, and he was great because he would go into the organization, and he would have a topic that he was interested in. Like when I was there, he was interested in judgment. He wanted people to make good judgments, and so he would go and find stories of good judgment, and then he would just recount the stories that he found. Right, so it was a really authentic, and he would tell the story and then sort of say, we need more of this. This is great work. So he was sort of kind of giving people accolades whilst finding examples of good judgment. And some of them are really nuanced, I suppose that's what judgment is, right? So they were fascinating, non-black and white stories. So that's what you do. You want to keep to real stories and change them up. That'd be a few things I'd say.
Alison wants to share also one of her experience.
Please.
Oh, really? Thank you so much. This has been an amazing session. I absolutely love storytelling. I am actually a business change manager in my day job, as well as being KM as well. Just very briefly, we went through a huge organizational transformation a couple of years ago. And the part of the business where I was very technical. It's called system integration, where we're integrating equipment together. And people were really unclear what was our business area all about. So I thought what I'd do was, there was already work going on in those areas. We just reshaped that part of the organization. So I did a web campaign where I got people to talk about their success stories. If they weren't ready to share those, what progress are you making? So I enticed people, instead of saying, oh, this is finished, it's done, we've completed it. Where are we so far, and what more do we have to do? And it proved to be really helpful to talk people through what the value was to the organization. So I
Yeah,
just
right.
thought I'd
That's
share
great.
that.
That's great, Alison. And there's you reminded me of two little story patterns that can be really helpful in that. One is just simply, I've seen technical people do this sort of accidentally, and it really engages the audience. One is simply things were good, then they were bad, and then they were good again, right? This is originally called Man in a Hole story structure, but I think they call it something a bit more generic these days. And the other one, which I think technical people need to use more of, is sort of like a mystery story format. And that's where you sort of say, well, the actual mystery story is classically there's a dead body, and then you've got to work out who killed the person, Agatha Christie style, right? It turns out the most what would you say, popular story structure ever, right? But in an organization is we've got this problem, that's the dead body. We tried this, didn't work. We tried that, didn't work either. We tried this, it worked. People love that story. They love that story. We want to be drawn along. We just don't want, oh, we had this problem, we solved it. We're less interested in that. Yeah. That's like doing the magic trick, without the fire.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all a bit sanitized. If it's
a bit
so
sanitized,
perfect, we don't want it too perfect, do we? We want some struggles in there as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good one,
Thank
Alison.
you so much.
Pleasure.
Okay, we're running a bit out of time, but let's have our last question from Rodolphe, right?
Okay, Rodolphe.
I don't have a question, but I want to share something that as a knowledge manager, you come across, and what we did, we would come across failure stories, things that did not work, but people had hidden it, but we highlighted it. So we then created posters, for example, demolished at 6 meters. It now stands tall at India's tallest rail pier at 105 meters, So we discovered that there was a problem and it had to be demolished. And then it was, so we created these stories, and then people would then immediately focus, how did they do the turnaround, So we created posters and we celebrated. And then from everywhere, people started sending in these stories saying that, I want to share something, I want to share something. So slowly failure stories started coming out.
Beautiful. Love it. Well, guys, all the best in your storytelling.
Yeah, thank you so much,
for your
Shawn.
attention.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think we could listen to you for hours and hours, and I think you got already a wonderful feedback on the meeting chat. I remember a long time ago you had mentioned that you were collecting stories. Is it? Do you still have a place where we can look at these stories, or not really?
Yeah. On our website, if you dig around, I'll see if I can find the URL. I'll send it to you. There is a place where we put a whole bunch of those stories. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And you early on during the meeting, you shared also a kind of
some PDFs.
Yes. So this will be self-explanatory how to structure your story, and you shared a copy of your book also, I saw.
Yeah, I did. I shared the book and the workbook for this program, Story Powered Change.
Okay.
Storytelling for Change, yeah.
Wonderful. For those of you who come late, we will share it again by email for all the members of this session. Shawn, thank you so very much. I mean, we could not get a better speaker than you for this topic, and thank you.
Pleasure.
And stay well, and hopefully we'll run into each other soon again.
That would be great.
Thank you.
All the best to everyone.
We added the workbook to the materials that are sent to the people in the shared drive. And in the email, I'll also share with everyone a book review I wrote on your book. Not so people don't read the book, but so that they see what it is about and decide to buy it. And if they already read it, they remember what they have been reading and go back and read it again.
Beautiful. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you all very much, and see you next
Thank
week.
you, Maria. Thank you,
Shawn.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.